So good morning, Graceway. Let me just follow up for a couple of seconds on what you just heard about coffee with the pastors, because people ask me all the time, what do I have to do to become a member of Graceway? What do I have to do to join? And really, there are two types of people that are here on Sunday mornings, and we're very thankful to God for both types of people. Some are attendees. They come and they attend, and we're thankful for that. Others are what we like to call sharers, because they share in the ministry. And really, when you talk about joining Graceway, that's what it means. What can I do to share in what God is doing? We share life together. We share a common salvation. We share common beliefs. We share ministry together. We share giving together. We do these things together as a community, as a family. And so if you would like to know what it takes to go a step beyond just attending and to really engage in what God is doing here, to know what it means to join Graceway, I would highly encourage you to attend coffee with the pastors next Sunday morning, as you just heard about. Okay, grab your Bibles and open them to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6. For the last several weeks, we have been working to understand a very important passage of Scripture that we sometimes refer to as the Beatitudes or the blessings. And as followers of Jesus, and this is the whole issue here, we do life differently. We're not to be like everybody else. We do life differently. And what we learned in these blessings or Beatitudes is that as disciples of Jesus, we don't do things in order to get blessed, but because we are blessed as followers of Jesus Christ. That changes the way that we do life. It changes what we do. It changes what we are. And so that's why this is so vitally important for us. And Jesus has been taking conventional wisdom and standing it on its head, turning it inside out. And Luke, as he has been telling us the story of Jesus, has shown how Jesus has claimed to be the promised Messiah that was promised by all of the prophets in the Scriptures. We have seen him choose 12, 20-something young men, none of whom had any theological background, to be his official representatives, his 12 apostles, as we normally call them. And by this time, it's very clear that Jesus has not come to establish a political kingdom that is going to raise up an army and run the Roman oppressors out of their land. That's what everybody had hoped that the Messiah would do. They were counting on that. They were looking for that, but it's very clear now that Jesus has come to set up a kingdom inside of his believers, in the hearts of those of us that are his disciples. And he has also made it crystal clear that what he offers is not just an update to the Old Testament law. It's not just a revision of the law. It is something totally and radically different, a new way of doing life. And so this morning, after spending the last several weeks in verses 20 to 26 here in chapter 6 of Luke, we're going to move on. But this is still part of this discourse or sermon or speech or whatever you want to call it that Jesus is giving on this occasion. It's the same context. We sometimes call this the Sermon on the Plain, because it says that Jesus spoke these words when he had come down from being on the mountain in prayer. Now, we often confuse this with a similar passage in the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 5, 6, and 7, that we call the Sermon on the Mount, because there it says Jesus went up from the plain onto the mount. So different sermons, different times, different people to whom Jesus is speaking, but the core truth is the same. He adjusts it for his audience and for the occasion, but the point that we're making is Jesus Christ had core truth that he taught over and over. Truth that is based on universal principles that can be applied to any situation, any culture, any point in history, any point in time. So that's what we're looking at here. Let's look at the text this morning. We're going to begin in verse 27. But I say unto you which hear, love your enemies, Do good to them that hate you. Bless them that curse you. Pray for them which despitefully use you. And unto him that smites you on the one cheek, offer also the other. And him that takes away your cloak, forbid not to take your coat also. Give to every man that asks of you, and of him that takes away thy goods, ask them not again. And as you would that men should do to you, do also to them likewise. Now that's as far as we're going to get this morning. We stopped with this passage we sometimes call the Golden Rule, and we'll come back to that in just a second. But here's what's happening. When Jesus says, "But I say unto you," that is a way to give his listeners to understand that he's now moving into a new section of what he's saying. He's moving from the Beatitudes or the blessings and woes to an application of that. This is really part 2 of a 3-part message where Jesus is totally redefining the world and the way that it works. And so, having already talked that we are blessed simply by being his disciples, he is now unpacking that state of blessedness and showing us the practices and the attitudes that are to result in our life as a consequence of that. And here's what we have to understand this morning. Disciples of Jesus are radically different. Radically different. And what we want to do is to answer the question, why? In what way? How are we different from everyone else? And if I were to summarize everything that we just read in one phrase that is the way that we might say it today, it would be this. Here's why we're different. As disciples of Jesus, we love those who do not love us back. We love those who do not love us back. And these words fit a very important context. Again, back to this initial phrase in verse 27, "But I say unto you which hear." Now that word "hear" is a very strong word, and because our word in English could go a couple of different ways, I want to make it very clear what Jesus is really saying. He's not talking about those of you who can hear the sound of my voice. He's saying those of you who get what I'm saying, those of you who are tracking with me, those of you who are hearing what I'm saying, in the sense that we might say today, are you listening to me? Do you hear what I'm saying? Repeat it back to me. So Jesus is continuing to build on everything that we have seen in verses 20 to 26, and he's addressing this now to those who are still with him. Now this is, some of them probably weren't. And by the time I get done this morning, some of you may not be. I'm serious. When you learn what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, you may think, well, that's not for me, and I'll respect you for that, but we have to understand not what I think it is. What does Jesus say? That's what we measure by. I'm just a messenger, okay? Jesus is the one that we follow. And so in this context, when the New Testament says that we have been set free from the law, and it does say that repeatedly, and means that we no longer live under the Old Testament law, any part of it. It's been fulfilled. Jesus didn't just come along and nuke it. He came to fulfill it, that he might establish something radically different in us. Okay, so the New Testament is not just the law version 2.03. Okay, this is something totally new. But when we say that we're free from the law, let me tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that God says, so just go do whatever you want, because it doesn't make any difference. No, that's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, now for the first time, you are free to serve me. For the first time, you are free to live as I originally designed you to live. So it's not just a free pass to go do whatever it is that occurs to you to do. We obey him. Jesus is the one that said on more than one occasion, if you love me, you will what? Keep my commandments. Not the Old Testament, but his commandments. And he's got some. Here's one of them. Love your enemies. And that's what we're looking at this morning. So look again at this phrase in verse 27. But I say unto you, which here. Now who's the you that he's talking to? These are the ones just mentioned earlier in verses 20 to 26 who have chosen intentionally to follow Jesus and to live life for the Son of Man's sake. And you remember how we've been defining that, and I put this literary diagram up on the screen repeatedly so that you see that the center phrase in verses 20 to 26 is the phrase that you find in verse 22, for the Son of Man's sake. Blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you that hunger now, for you shall be filled. Blessed are you that weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men shall hate you, and when they shall separate you from the company, and shall reproach you, and cast out your name as evil, for the Son of Man's sake. In other words, you're not blessed just because you're poor. Poor people are not inherently more spiritual than rich people. Rich people are not inherently more poor or more spiritual than poor people. What Jesus is saying is, when you have chosen to live life for my sake, there will be times when you don't maybe have all the stuff that you want. There will be times when you may not have even enough to eat. There will be times when you will endure horrific sadness for my sake. And there will be times when people will hate you for my sake. But you're blessed. Don't forget it, you're blessed. And when all you care about in life is to get all the stuff that you can get and to fill your own belly and to pursue happiness at whatever cost and to worry about only protecting your own name and reputation, woe unto you. You're not blessed. Now, it's to you who have made this choice to follow Jesus for his own sake that he addresses these words. But I say unto you which hear. Maybe we're talking about you this morning, because we're going to be talking about what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And some of you may decide that's not for you, because it's not normal, it's not natural, it's not what you've always thought, what you've always heard, what you've always imagined. There is one overarching command that dominates this passage we read this morning, verses 27 to 31. And it's simply this: love your enemies. Love your enemies. Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing like this in the history of any culture. There are cultures through the years that have encouraged compassion toward a defeated enemy. And that's good. But there is nothing, this is new, this is radically new for someone to say, but I say unto you, love your enemies. That's what it is to be a follower of Jesus Christ. So who is that? Look back in verse 22. Blessed are you when men shall hate you, and when they shall separate you from their company, when they'll take you off their list and shall reproach you. They will insult you. They'll cast out your name as evil. They will do what they can to destroy your reputation for the Son of Man's sake. That's who Jesus is talking about when he says, love your enemies. The ones that hurt you, the ones that smudge your reputation, the ones that steal from you, the ones that take advantage of you. Jesus said, you want to be my disciple? Love them. Okay, how are we doing? Anybody ready to bail? This is This is what Jesus says. This is not Jeff's definition of what it means to be a disciple. This is Jesus' definition. So in section 1 of the sermon, verses 20 to 26, Jesus turns conventional wisdom on its head, and here in section 2, beginning in verse 27, he's totally redefining the world in contrast to the scribes and the Pharisees, who were the respected religious leaders of his day, who had reduced themselves to being really nothing more than religious hall monitors, making sure that everybody was keeping the rules. A lot of times in churches, we live at that level. We just got to make sure everybody's keeping the rules. That's not what Jesus is concerned about. Jesus is concerned about us living the life. And a very important aspect of that is loving our enemies, those who hate us for Jesus' sake. Now again, remember what we talked about last week. This is not talking about people who hate you because you're irresponsible and obnoxious and don't follow through. Okay, that's a totally different issue. This is what do you do when people hate you for Jesus' sake? And Jesus says, you love them. You love them. And so the context here is persecution, not criminal acts. And it's important to understand that as believers, we don't have to abandon recourse to justice in the societies where we live in such cases. But even then, we can choose to love an enemy who has inflicted great harm. That is an option that we have as followers of Jesus. That's a command that we have as followers of Jesus. Now, what Jesus is going to say in this passage, and we're going to come back and hammer on this the next week or two, Jesus is giving us 3 big demands for his followers. You want to talk about the commandments of Jesus? Here's 3 of them. And what's so interesting about this, he layers these 3 commands, mixing them in with 8 qualities that help us understand how to live out these commands. And these commands I'm going to include as part of the 8. So the 3 that we're going to talk about and 5 more, and I'll break that out. But you need to understand what I've been telling you since we began to study the Gospel of Luke. These words are written in an Eastern society, in a Middle Eastern culture that is very different than Western culture, in which probably the majority of us here this morning were raised in. We are an international church. We have people in our church who come from the Middle East, who come from Africa, who come from Asia, who come from Latin America, most of whom come from cultures that are far more similar to the biblical culture than people who grow up in a European-influenced culture, as in the West. We like to lay things out. 3 big commands. Give them to them and write them down. 1, 2, 3. Well, Jesus is going to give us 3 commands. In fact, he's going to give them to us 3 times in this short passage. So there's no way that you can miss it. But he does so spiraling them, mixing them, integrating them into the whole, rather than just saying, okay, here's the 3 big commands. Here's 8 qualities. Got it. Let's go. That's the way we do things in the West. It's not the way that Jesus did things. I want you to see the big commands. Number 1, be a lover. Look in verse 27. But I say unto you which hear, love your enemies. Look in verse 32. For if you love them which love you, what thank have you? For sinners also love those that love them. Look in verse 35. But love your enemies and do good, etc. Okay? 3 times. Be a lover. Even love your enemies. Be a lover. And the second thing that Jesus tells us to do is to be a doer. And he's going to repeat it 3 times. In verse 27, once again, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you. Drop down to verse 33. And if you do good to them which do good to you, what thank have you? For sinners also do even the same. And then in verse 35, but love your enemies and do good. So 3 times he tells us to be doers. Be lovers, be doers, and then he tells us to be givers. Verse 29. And unto him that smites you on the one cheek, offer also the other. And him that takes away your cloak, forbid not to take your coat also. Give to every man that asks of you. And then look in verse 35. And if you lend to them of whom you hope to receive, what thank have you? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies and do good and lend. Now there's a summary statement there, okay? Love, be lovers, be doers, be givers. And then look in verse 38. Give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, shall men give into your bosom, for with the same measure that you mete or measure withal, it shall be measured to you again. So every one of these big commands is repeated 3 times in the context. What were they? Be lovers, be doers, and be givers. I want you just to think about that for a second. Let that soak in, because again, there's nothing wrong with being from Western culture. I want you to get this. Be lovers, be doers, be givers. And everything that Jesus is saying here in this context is built around these 3 big actions, these 3 big commands that he expects of us as his followers. But he layers these 3 commands among 8 specific behaviors that we should have in our lives as his followers. And they include the 3 big commands. Number 1, verse 27, you've seen it, love your enemies. Number 2, verse 27, do good to them which hate you. Now, let me pause here for just a second. I want you to make sure you don't miss this. True love is not passive. It's active. As hard as it is to say to an enemy, I love you, it's meaningless if the love is not accompanied by action. Okay, you with me? That's why the doing good part is so important. It's not just a passive, yeah, I love you. No, it's doing good to those that hate you. What can I do good for these people or this person? And then number 3, he says to bless them. Verse 28, bless them that curse you. In other words, using your tongue in a positive way toward those who have verbally attacked you, to those who have insulted you, to those who have smudged your reputation, to those who have damaged your good name, to those who have used their tongue to hurt you painfully. Jesus said, use your tongue to bless them. And that's how you respond to people like that. And then in verse 28, here's number 4, pray for them. Pray for them that despitefully use you. In essence, numbers 2, 3, and 4 unzip how to carry out number 1, love your enemy. How do I do that? Well, I do good to them, I bless them, I pray for them. Those are very positive, active, tangible ways that I can love my enemy. One thing to say, yeah, I love my enemies. Yeah, okay, anybody can say that. But if you truly love your enemy, you will do good to them. You will use your tongue to bless them, to encourage them in some way. You will pray for them. Those are measurables. It's more than just talking about it. Some of you are looking at me like you're thinking, I'm not so sure I want to be a disciple now. I mean, this is what Jesus is saying here. And then number 5, and let me I'm going to read this to you, but let me just explain what's going on here, and then I'll help you to understand what Jesus says. Refuse to defend your pride or honor. Let me show you where I get that. Look in verse 29. And unto him that smites you on the one cheek, offer also the other to him. Now, this is so often misunderstood because we don't have this in our culture today. And if you don't understand the context in which this was written, you're liable to misinterpret that. Sometimes in the gun control debate and all this, and Christians are just supposed to roll over and play dead, and we're not able to defend ourselves. That's not what this is about. In biblical times, in Middle Eastern culture, The absolute worst insult that you could do to someone would be to publicly slap them in the face. And as you read writings from that time period, people make statements like, that's worse than being beaten with a whip until your back is bloody. In Middle Eastern culture today, you might be aware that a person's shoe is often part of an insult. You remember when President Bush some years ago had somebody throw a shoe at him in public, which was just, how could you do that? When you're in the Middle East, you have to be very careful with how you cross your legs. You never show the bottom of your shoe to someone because it's considered an obscene gesture. And that's just the way that cultures are. We have obscene gestures in our culture. I hope I don't have to define them for you this morning, all right? You can probably fill in the blanks. But I want you to understand what's happening here, that this slap on the face, and the only thing I can find in American history that is like that is back in the early days of our nation. You remember the Hamilton-Burr duel, and you might be aware that there was a period of time in American history where to challenge someone to a duel, you would sometimes take your glove and slap them in the face. And then it was incumbent upon them to defend their honor. And that's what it was all. It was a thing of honor. Had nothing to do with an aggressive physical act that was designed to do you bodily harm. That would come later when you got the guns out. And so when Jesus says this, if somebody slapped you on the face, turn and let them slap you on the other face. In other words, don't defend your honor or your pride. Somebody wants to insult you, let them. Okay, we just destroyed a lot of stuff from the way that we were raised, right? Son, let me tell you what you do. You take that guy, you get him down on the ground, and you beat the brains out of him. We got a former cop killing cops in California. They're looking for him right now because he felt that his name had been violated. You've read any of the manifesto that he put up on his Facebook? That's really kind of the root of what is festering in him. He's willing to die to protect his name because he made the statement, if man doesn't have a name, he doesn't have anything. And I get that. I understand that. I mean, we've all been there. But what Jesus is saying, no, I'm going to teach you a new way to do life. This is radically different. When somebody insults you and hurts your pride, let them. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And then he says in verse 29, the last part, and he that takes away your cloak, forbid not to take your coat also. Now, cloak and coat, inner garment, outer garment. Somebody steals one thing, give them the other. In other words, let me summarize that. Be a giver to those who are takers. When somebody's taking stuff from you, what do? You give them more. And not only that, in verse 30, here's number 7. Give to every man that ask of you. Every man. And this is so critical to understand. Jesus is essentially telling us to erase the distinction between friends and enemies. Treat all people alike. So that's hard. That's what he did to us. Romans 5:8, he loved us even when we were yet his enemies. And then he says in verse 30, him that takes away your goods, ask them not again. In other words, don't expect anything in return. Do all of this not expecting anything in return. Well, I did this and it didn't work. Nobody said anything about working. He said, love your enemies. Do good. Give. Don't defend your pride. Well, I did that, but No. He said, do that. Well, Can you think of anybody in history, in the Bible, that fits the profile? Somebody who, for example, was stripped naked, insulted, beaten, killed, left no earthly goods behind? Yeah, that would be Jesus, wouldn't it? So here's what Jesus is saying. Here's what it means to be my disciple. It means to become like me. It means to become like me. Wow. So, we're not to be rule followers. We are to be reflectors of the very nature and character of Jesus Christ. And as his followers, we suffer and we respond in community. Let me show you something interesting pretty quick here in verses 27 to 29, or 28 rather. Those are all plural references, like I was telling you last week. But I say unto y'all which hear, love y'all's enemy, do good to them which hate y'all, bless them that curse y'all, pray for them which spitefully use y'all. Being a disciple of Jesus Christ is never meant to be a matter of just attending church once in a while, listening to some guy like me speak, and then making mental notes of a few ways to apply some of this stuff to your life. And that's all good stuff to do, but that's not what it means. We are the church. And we, the church, will face problems. We will have enemies. We share, we suffer, we respond in community. That's the emphasis on the small group here at Graceway, so that we have opportunities to stand with each other in times of opposition, to be able to be part of each other's life, to share in that way. Now, each member of Jesus' community has specific responsibilities as well, and it's striking that in verses 29 and 30, the tense changes back to singular. The person changes back to singular. He that smites you as an individual on the one cheek, offer you as an individual the other. Now, this is what it means to take up your cross and follow Jesus. Last week I told you about some people in the last few weeks who have lost their lives for the mere fact that they're followers of Jesus Christ. In this country, you probably won't be in a position where you're asked to do that. I don't know. I can't guarantee that. You probably won't be asked to die physically for Jesus' sake, but all of us, no matter where we live, are asked to die to self and die to sin. And in this culture, we have made being a follower of Jesus a way to find gratification for my selfish desires by asking God to do something for me. We have totally taken the teachings of Jesus and turned them inside out and made it all about us. And this is what Jesus really said. So, this is huge. And that's why a disciple of Jesus Christ is not somebody who's completed a course. Okay, you understand what we're saying here? I went through a course. I'm a disciple now. No, you went through a course, and I hope it was good, and I hope you got a lot out of it. But being a disciple is someone who really lives like this. That's what a disciple is. Are you? Or do you suddenly think, you know, this thing's deeper than I thought. I think I'm getting out of here. I understand that. And I'll respect you more if you make an intelligent decision based upon what Jesus said. And not somebody trying to talk you into coming to our church because it's neat and cool and hip. No, it's more than that. And then I want you to see this verse here, verse 31, where we quit our reading this morning. We sometimes call this the golden rule. And as you would that men should do to you, do also to them likewise. Now, here again, Jesus is going to take conventional wisdom and turn it upside down. You might know, if you read a lot, that this golden rule, supposedly, it appears in many different cultures long before Jesus came along. There's many different cultures that have similar statements, but they're a little different because what Jesus does, he takes this. Some people say, well, Jesus is borrowed from other cultures. No, not when you look at this, because what Jesus does, this is what is so amazing, he took a concept that everyone in that world was familiar with, and he gave it a twist that no one expected. Now, here's the way conventional wisdom thinks of the golden rule, even today. Well, if I act in this way, then people are going to treat me that way. So I'm going to love you so that you'll love me back. That's the way we normally think of it. Middle Eastern culture is famous for its hospitality even today. I was talking to a guy after the early service, and he used to work for a company here, and he was telling me about an experience that he had that just solidified this. If you know someone from the Middle East and you might happen to comment, well, that's a lovely this or that, they're liable to take that off the wall or off their body and give it to you right there with great pleasure. They've been raised that way. That's the culture. I've seen this happen so many times where, the guy that I was talking to, he had commented, he said, this guy had the most beautiful tie I'd ever seen. I said, that's just a beautiful tie. He took it right off his neck and gave it to him. And they have this amazing reputation for hospitality that is well-deserved. However, and we're an international church, we have a lot of you that come from cultures like that. A lot of you. And so please stay with me, because I'm going to say something. Don't interpret this as me trying to say that one culture is better than the other. I'm just saying, no, we're all humans. And here's the other side to famous Middle Eastern hospitality, or other cultures that have, and there are other cultures that have the same element. In fact, most cultures in the world are like that. We're the ones that are different in the West. But here's the other side to that. What happens if you're not careful, you fall into the trap of doing something expecting to get something in return. And people who are givers often get very frustrated when people don't give back, even though their giving may be genuine and heartfelt. But we expect something. It's all based upon reciprocity. I do this for you, and then you do that for me. And when you fall into that trap, I want you to think about this, gifts really become debts. And I'm going to say something maybe a little controversial, and I certainly don't want to make anyone upset, but in our own country, about 150 years ago, we fought a horrible civil war. And as a consequence of that civil war, slavery was abolished. And so many studies have been done on this, but if you look at the South, after the Civil War, even though slavery was abolished, now slaves are called servants. And you would hear so many people in the South say, sometimes even to this day, well, we treat our servants so well. And what happened and some people do, and if you have a lot of money and you want to hire somebody to work in your household, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Pay them a fair salary and treat them with dignity as a person. But what happened in reality is a lot of former slaveholders would say, okay, tell you what, I'm going to treat you really nice so that you want to, and really they wouldn't pay them anything other than their own food, and they had no opportunity to do anything else. They became indentured servants, meaning they were trapped still. That's not called freedom. And honestly, that's one of the reasons we've been working through this for a long time. Let's just be honest in family. It's well, look how nice I am to this person. That's why they work for me. Are you sure, or is it that they're working for you because they don't have any other realistic possibility other than starving? And so that's the way this reciprocity works, where we do things, we congratulate ourselves by patting us on the back. Look how nice I am for people, and look how they are nice back to me. Here's what Jesus did that changed everything. He said, treat others as you would be treated, period. Jesus' golden rule has no strings attached and expects nothing in return. We treat people with dignity because they are people and not because we expect anything in return. We treat all alike. Enemy, friend, we treat all people alike. And the key word here is do, not expecting or receiving in return. We just do it because that's what Jesus did. In the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew adds the phrase, for this is the law and the prophets. In other words, this is what fulfills all of the Old Testament scripture. This is it. Now, he says that because he's writing to Jews who were still struggling to come out from under the law. Luke doesn't have to mention that. He's writing for non-Jews. They never lived under the law. What is your biggest enemy? Who would that be? Can you put a face to that? It may be a spouse. It may be a family member. It may be a neighbor. It may be a coworker or a boss. I don't know. What do you do to them as a result of what Jesus says? 3 of our pastoral team here at Graceway are in Iraq this morning. They're ministering to people who at one time, not long ago at all, were considered our enemies. Picture came in last night. I thought it'd be good to show you. I want you to see it up here. You'll recognize these guys. Here it is. Computer slows down a little bit midway through the morning. Well, maybe it'll get up there, maybe it won't, but there's a picture of 3 of our Graceway pastors with another gentleman who are around the bed of a man who was in the hospital. This man fought for Saddam Hussein against us. And you see our Graceway guys over him, praying for him, who is now a brother in Jesus Christ. And your giving makes it possible for them to do that. They are our representatives because we are the church. In a very literal way, they're loving an enemy. Amazing stuff. So what are you taking home to your kids and your grandkids? Do they hear racial slurs coming out of your mouth? Old useless attitudes that kept people divided for years? Don't trust this person, don't trust that person, or what are you taking home? Do they hear you say things like, I don't get mad, I just get even, because you think it's cute? And they may take you seriously? Do you live like that? Is there tangible evidence by the way that you treat others that you're a disciple of Jesus Christ? That's the question. Love your enemies as though they were friends, and treat all the same way, expecting nothing in return. I'm going to ask you to stand with me, and we're going to pray, and when I've prayed, we're going to receive